So I'll just start by giving a quick outline about what the presentation will discuss today. So overall, I'll be discussing Dash, which is one of Plotly's newer products. And Dash is a Pythonic framework for building analytic web applications. So first I'll go through an introduction to Dash, and then I'm going to go through a few of our sample applications so you can start to see what's possible. And then finally we'll go through a quick demo and actually look at the code that you would use to write your application. So just before I get started with Dash, some of you may be familiar with Plotly, so I'm going to quickly just describe the Plotly ecosystem. So first, we have Plotly.js, which is our open-sourced JS charting library. So that's built on top of D3 and StackGL. And then we have a few APIs as well, like our Python, R, and Julia APIs. So this is basically so data scientists can continue their visualizations in the language that they're using for the analysis as well. And then we have Chart Studio, which is an online platform, and this includes a graphical user interface. So if you're not quite coding or you just want to use an interface to create the charts, we have that option online. And then finally, we've built Dash, which is, like I mentioned before, the framework for building web applications. So kind of like the APIs, the idea here is that Python users can continue doing their analysis, their visualizations, and then finally the full interactive web application all in Python. So before we move on to the applications, I just have a chart, a few charts here so you can kind of see the different charts that you can create with Plotly. So all the charts are interactive, so we have hover, click and drag to zoom capabilities, and then also interactive legends, so you can click to remove the traces there and resize. Yep. So just to get an idea, we also have annotations, animations. So that's just animating a heat map there to look at different sections of a brain. And then some of our newer chart types as well with additional interactivity there. So that kind of gives a super quick glimpse into the charting aspect of Plotly. And so now I'll move on to actually discussing Dash and the application framework. So what is Dash? I've done this presentation in it, so you're looking at it. And it's just a productive framework for building web applications all in Python. We wrote this on top of Flask and Plotly.js as well as React.js. So basically made Pythonic wrappers around React.js components. And like I mentioned before, this is ideal for Python data scientists who want to build a very customized user interface all in Python. And so we'll go through, but basically it's going to be just a few simple patterns, and that will allow you to create callbacks and add that interactivity into your applications. And hopefully you'll find the syntax pretty simple and easy to get started with as well. And all of these apps are going to be rendered in a web browser. And this is really nice because it inherently makes your applications cross-platform and then mobile ready as well. And easy to share because you'll be able to send that to your send your application to your colleagues via a URL rather than trying to bundle up the code and making sure it's compatible to run on their system as well. So to get started with Dash, I've embedded the documentation, which is a Dash app as well, inside this presentation application. And I'm just going to quickly go through the install part so you'd be able to get up and running if you're interested in creating some applications of your own. So all of the packages are on pip, and basically you'd install Dash HTML components, and then Dash core components as well. We also have a few additional repositories, such as the Dash table, which I'm going to be discussing in one of the sample applications, and that's one of our newer, very involved components that we released at the end of last year. Yep. Yeah, so after you get those packages installed, you'd be able to start with the layout portion. So if we just hop over there for a second and check out Dash layouts. So to create a layout, you'd basically put together a few of the HTML components. So all in your Python file, you'd be adding headers, divs, whatever you want to organize the layout of your application there. So for example here, we'll set up the app layout, and we'll set that as an HTML.div function. So that's just importing the Dash HTML components as HTML, and then using HTML dot our headers, our divs, etc., to build that up. And then we've imported the Dash core components package to add those core components. And so if you want to add dropdowns, graphs, etc., you'll be adding those to your layout as well. So for example, inside my layout here, I have a header, a div with some text, and then a Dash core component graph, which this will create the figure, which will then render the Plotly.js graph that you're adding there. Okay. Great. So, yep, you can check out that documentation at dash.plot.ly. And I'll have a few helpful links at the end of the presentation as well, so you can get started with those. So now moving on to the fun part, we have adding the interactivity. So after we've set up the layout, we'll be able to add the callbacks to our application in order to add the interactivity to allow your users to make selections in your application and render different elements based on those selections. So for example, we have our layout here where I've added a dropdown that you can see, and then as well as an HTML div, so I can have an output container to display some text. So now to add the interactivity, I'll use our callbacks. So we'll use this callback decorator. So here in the decorator syntax, we're going to pass through our output argument and then as well as our input arguments. So at this time, each callback can only have one single output. So you'll just pass through one output, and then you can pass through multiple inputs. So the inputs will be added in an array to allow for multiple inputs if you'd like. So in the output, we have the first argument is the ID of what I want to update. So here I have my HTML div that I'm updating, and I have the ID set. So I'll match that in my callback as output container. And what do I want to update of the output container? I want to update the children there. Then I have my input, which is my dropdown, which I've ID'd as my dropdown. And then what do I want to use as the input? I want to use the value returned in the dropdown there. And And then I just have my function of what I want to happen in this callback. So I'm using the value that I'm getting from the input, and then I just want to return a formatted string where I'm formatting that value. So here you can see when I make a selection, it will update my text here with the value of what I'm selecting in the dropdown. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, we're passing through those inputs as an array because we can have multiple inputs in a function. So here we actually have a little more complicated example where I have a dropdown that will then update the second selection there. And finally, the text will get updated as well. So to do this, my layout's pretty similar, but I'll have 3 callbacks now. So first, I'll update the city's dropdown, which would be these radio buttons here. Then collect the selection that I'm making there. And finally, the string below will get updated with both the value from the country dropdown and then the value from the city selection as well. Great. So the previous examples were using the core components like drop-downs or radio buttons to add that interactivity into the application. But we can also use the interactive graphing elements from those Plotly.js graphs in the application as well to create some drill down throughout the application. So this, I'm going to zoom out so we can kind of see it all on one page there, but this example looks a little boring, but it's actually my favorite Dash example that we have because it outlines how to use that interactive graphing function really well. So like I mentioned before, we have some hovering interaction. So here in this application, when I hover on the points, we can see below what's actually returned from that hover interaction. And same with clicking on the points. So when I click, I get the points returned below. So yep, right now I have compare hover selected, but if I go to just show closest, instead of returning the array of both traces, it's going to return just the single point there. Same with hovering. So if we take a look down here, we get to see the curve or trace number that's been selected, as well as the point number, point index, and then we get that X and Y information back as well. And then we also have the zoom interactivity, so you can zoom and get those ranges returned, as well as know if just auto range is set there. So then you'll be able to use this information to further update another chart or a table or anything you want in order to create drill down throughout your application. Great. Okay, so after you've kind of built the skeleton there of your application, we do allow style customization, full style customization, and so you can do this via CSS. And so we'll provide a recommended CSS style sheet that you can add just to get started, and that's hosted on CodePen, and I've embedded it here just so you can kind of see a bit of the suggested styles that we've added and what some of those elements would look like. But we also allow inline CSS as well as the ability for you to add your own style sheet. So you'll be able to get that fully customized as well. So here's just a quick example of if we were creating our layout here and we just want to update the color, background color, a border, something like that. We'd be able, in our Python file, just to pass through this style dictionary directly there. So we never have to leave the Python file, and we get the style customized all in the application. So that's a pretty simple example, but if you want to get really customized, you can add a CSS style sheet that you've created yourself in order to get all of those updates set for you. Okay. Yep, so let me zoom back in so you guys can see that. Great, so we have our documentation at dash.plot.ly. We have the core GitHub repo at github.com/plotly/dash. Dash HTML components, dash core components, those are all open source, so you can go on GitHub and see all of the source code there for all of those repositories. And then we also have a super active community forum as well, where there's a lot of good questions and some examples as well of community use of a lot of different Dash applications. So now I'm going to just go through, leave the presentation and go through a few different examples of applications. So, so you guys can see a few different use cases. Yep. So this is one of my favorite applications to demo because we get to use a super fun image of ponies wearing sweaters. So there, we've created this application, and it's going to display a bit of image processing. So I've uploaded my favorite image here. And then I believe this is just using the pillow package. And we're going to apply a few filters on the image, and then we can see just how the RGB values there will differ when these filters are applied. So yeah, if I just, maybe if I sharpen and then enhance the contrast quite a bit, we can then see how the graph gets updated after those colors are changed a bit based on the image processing there. So yep, this app's hosted online. We also have all the source code online too. If you check out the gallery in our docs, you'd be able to access this and play around with it with your own images as well. Okay, moving on, now we have the data table application. So like I mentioned earlier, we released in November an updated version of an updated beta version of our Dash data table component. And so that component lives in its own repository. And yep, you can, it's also open source, so you can check out all the code for that. So we worked on this for a pretty long time in order to add sorting and filtering functionality to the table. And some of that filtering syntax is subject to change, but that's all explained in the GitHub repository, as well as our documentation for this. Yep. So there's, you not only have the ability to download the CSV, the table is also editable and selectable, so you can select regions there, copy and paste back and forth between Excel or Google Sheets or whatever other, hopefully whatever other spreadsheet you're using there. And then you can also make selections here. And in this example, we're making selections and then updating the charts below to highlight the countries that are selected there. As well as sorting and filtering will also get applied to the charts as well. And then this is a pretty big data set, so I've added the paging option as well, so we're not overwhelmed at the start seeing all of the options at once in the table. that wouldn't make for a very functional application. Great. Yep, so next, this is a pretty nice example that was created by a member of our community. So it allows you to make selections there based on your own family history, and then you can kind of see the annotations move around, so you can kind of apply your own family history to how to this climate change plot here. Yep. Okay, so next, this example kind of furthers how to do the graph drill down. So in addition to making selections on the slider, we have the option here of making a selection on the map, which will then in turn update the graph that we're looking at, update the bar plot. We can then also, if we want to look at different trends, that should update as well. Or the histogram. Okay. So just another example of being able to apply graph drill down throughout the application, as well as having other elements that the user can select to further explore the data set. Okay. One of the new functionalities that we've been working on pretty recently is the ability to create PDF exports and snapshots of your application, and then these can also be scheduled. So if you have data that's live streaming and updating, you'll be able to schedule kind of a snapshot so you can kind of keep track of the different updates there. Yep, so when we create the snapshot, it then gets saved into our archive, and we'll be able to see not only a web version of it, so we'll have the interactive web version of the snapshot, but we're also going to be saving a PDF option as well. And then, yep, like I mentioned, we have all of that stored in our archive, so you'll be able to go back and check and access previous reports and previous data as well. And I think I just have one more example. Yeah, so then this example just is to showcase the different hover events. So as we're hovering on the graph, you'll notice the drug representation to the right of the graph is updating as well. And then we have the drop down if we want to store some of those in a list below. Okay, so that provides pretty much an overview of a lot of the capabilities and different kind of applications that you can build with Dash. And finally, I just wanted to look at the code for a simple example, so we can kind of go through and see exactly what the code entails. Okay. So this example is just over 100 lines of code from start to finish there. And this creates this example where we have a drop-down to select different countries of that Gapminder data set, and then as well as a slider to kind of scroll through the years there. So we're using the packages that I all mentioned earlier, as well as pandas. Setting up the app. See if I can zoom in a little more. Then appending the CSS file, and that's referencing that CSS file that I mentioned earlier that's hosted on CodePen. And then just importing the data and creating a unique list of the continent and years in that data. And then going through my app layout, which again is just going to be a combination of those HTML components and core components in order to create the layout of the application I want. And in this, I've put all the styling that's outside of that CSS file, like all the styling, all the custom styling that I wanted to add to the application, I've just added inline there. You can see the background color of that header element that I have and changing the text color in there. Yep. And then finally, we just have a few callbacks below where I'm able to update the graph based on the drop-down and slider values there. So then my update graph function is just typical Python syntax where I'm then kind of going through, seeing what my selection is, filtering the data frame, and then updating my figure in order to display the different traces there. So that's going to append the data trace to the Plotly figure. And then also I'm just defining a few layout elements of the Plotly figure that I want to define, such as the title that's updated by the slider value, and then some of the axis styling as well. Yep, and then we just have to define the app server, and that's pretty much it. So we get that application in 103 lines of Python code. Great. So, yep, that's pretty much it. So I'll just take any questions if there are any questions.
Thank you for the talk. I have two questions. The first one is where your favorite picture was taken?
In Scotland.
Scotland.
Yeah. Yep.
Good. The second is how's the Dash has any connectors to distributed systems like Spark or Impala, and how's the performance when you use distributed systems?
Yeah, so for data connection?
Correct.
Yeah, so since it's a Python package, you can use any Python connection, any Python libraries that have been used to create that connection. So I think there's like PySpark or something like that. I'm not sure if Impala has a Python connector. I haven't used that, but yeah, any SQL connection or anything like that you're using in your Python code and functionality anyway should be able to get applied to your Dash application. Not quite, but we do have an update component that will allow that to happen. So in the examples I've showed, I wasn't using that update component, but I do have an example that I'd be happy to show you that uses, so it's a Dash core component, dcc.update, and you can set the interval, and that will allow your app to refresh, or certain elements of your app to refresh. And yep, specifically if you want to update your data or kind of show a live streaming, that allows that to happen. Yep.
Anyone else?
So if somebody writes an application that expects some user data and the user uploads much more data than was expected, is Dash able to smartly understand that this interactive component can't handle that, or maybe in the Plotly renderer not to try to plot 8 bajillion data points at once, or does Dash handle that for me on its own?
Yeah, we don't have a built-in functionality to do that, so that would kind of be up to the app creator, to the app developer, to be able to set any limitations there, or yeah, clearly explain what the upload intention is. But yeah, we wouldn't have any inherent behavior that would limit uploads to the application directly. Good question. Yeah.
Going once. Twice.
So I noticed pricing for the server.
Yep.
What does that do for a potential customer rather than just kind of hosting my apps myself?
Yeah. Yep, like I mentioned, so the packages I've talked about today are open source, so you can get started using those automatically. We have our Dash deployment server, which we recommend for enterprises, especially if you have specific security functionality that you need implemented. So what that adds beyond you like deploying to Heroku or something is our auth packages and our application privacy settings. So we have different options where we can integrate that with your AD or LDAP systems and then allow you to share applications with specific groups, specific individuals, different things like that. Set the privacy to be completely private, public to your company and whoever has access to your server, or the specific sharing options. And then we've also started building out a bit of functionality. So like the report and snapshotting example that I showed quickly, that would integrate with on your server, for example. So you have everything stored on databases on your server, basically. So there's a few different added functionalities like those that would, just allow you to get deployed, up and running, and sharing a little bit faster than if you were building out that functionality yourself in your application. Yeah.
Still got a couple minutes, so don't be shy. All right, so thank you, Chelsea.